This podcast is not currently supported or sponsored by any company. However, I would like to pay homage to all the church fellowships I've been a part of: Church of God of Prophecy, KICC, Luton Christian Fellowship, True Vine Fellowship, and New Covenant Fellowship. From little to big boy, knee high to a grasshopper, from immature child to an ever growing man who serves a great God. Let's go! Welcome to the Cool But Reluctant podcast hosted by your man Jay Fields, where you hear insight into my journey as a musician, worship leader, member of several local churches at various stages, as well as guests, if we get that far, and their journeys and stories with the hope and aim to encourage and inspire all who are listening, whom perhaps maybe are at the stage where I've been or I guess have experienced previously. So you probably should just get down to brass tacks. I don't know why I'm using that phrase because it's not even a British term that is used a lot. Like I mainly hear it from Americans, but like on TV because I've grown up just watching a load of like predominantly American TV actually. So there's a lot of phrases that I feel like I've actually used, like the word stoked. British people rarely ever use. Brass tacks was rarely ever used. There's probably another phrase that I'm thinking of, but I can't even remember. But anyway, you lot are gonna get to know me a lot as I do this podcast because I can very much make myself laugh, and I'm very used to talking to myself, and which could probably help regarding this, and it's probably helped in my prayer life with because I could just probably switch and transition from talking to myself and kind of just talking to God and kind of laughing at myself regarding certain things to maintain that kind of friendship, I guess, that I've had with God. Because if I can appreciate myself like this, then I know God's probably laughing with me at the same time. And I hope you guys feel like that as well, if there's anyone similar to me like that. But yeah, you should probably get down. I don't want to say brass tacks again. But why am I actually doing this podcast? Like, people who are probably listening to this that do know me, they'll be like, that's interesting, John's doing this. He's just more a music man. He's never really spoken that much. But to be fair, I'm not really someone that actually speaks for a prolonged period of time, unless we're in a certain kind of subject um, conversation about something that I can probably contribute quite a lot on. But I'm not one that's like verbal diarrhea at a lot of people. I am more of a listener than I am actually a talker. But I hope you guys can learn from whatever I say. Um, but yeah, why am I doing this? Do you know what? During the pandemic, I've realized, and probably having a few conversations with people, like it's not even conversations on the phone because if you, like I was just saying before, I'm more of a listener than I am a talker. So if I rarely call people, and I would rather a voice note. But at the same time, like if I was to speak to him on the phone, I'm the one doing the least amount of talking. If I had a conversation with someone that's probably like an hour, 2 hours or something, like a lot of that time, it's not me speaking. And it's not because the other person's like self-absorbed or whatever. It just happens to be like that. But and I just feed into the conversation wherever I can. And it stays engaging, I guess. But yeah, I've realized like when I would send a voice note to someone, they ended up just being really long. And I was just thinking, how am I taking this long to explain something on a voice note? And it's not even because I'm not even being to the point. Like, it just ends up just being long. And then I remember one of my friends, like we always just have like this mini joke now. It's like, okay, we're ready for your podcast now, because like our voice notes end up being like 10 minutes minimum. Like, and you know when you're just catching up with people that you haven't spoke to in a while, they end up being long voice notes, don't they? And then you're waiting. But the thing is with me, I don't like to speed up my listening time unless I'm that busy and I need to just get through it. But I try to not do that because I feel like I really just want to hear what the person's saying. And I feel like sometimes things can be misconstrued depending on how someone phrases their sentences, could actually come off a bit worse because if it's sped up, then it feels like they're being more anxious about what they're saying. But when you actually have it in normal speed, it's not even coming across that way at all. But yeah, so that's number one of the main reasons I thought to do this podcast. Not because I just realized I could speak for a prolonged period of time, and I was like, oh, let's do a podcast. I realized I actually do have a voice that God probably wants me to share with whoever is willing to listen, whether that's just two people on this podcast or what. It doesn't really matter. I feel like I've been called, and I have been reluctant, which is why the name of this podcast is called but reluctant. It's because I think a lot of people have had that feeling, don't they? In terms of like feeling like they're called, but they've just been reluctant to just step out there, or just there's just that insecurity that is kind of innate in us sometimes, or a lot of the time, I should say. And we just don't know how to go about things, and it just ends up making us procrastinate, or we just forget about it because we fill our minds and hearts with other things, and we forget about the other thing. And you just end up going around in circles. But I really feel like this is the right time in my life to actually start this podcast. And I feel like just the only scripture I'm going to mention in this particular episode, that I feel like that it can relate to this, is probably in Exodus 4, the conversation Moses has with the Lord. So Exodus 4, chapter 4, verse 10 to 17, which says, Moses said to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." The Lord said to him, "Who gave humans their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will make..." No, it doesn't say that. "I will help you speak and will teach you what to say." But Moses said, "Pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else." Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, "What about your brother Aaron, the Levite? I know he can speak well. He is already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I'll help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth, and as if you were God to him. But take this staff in your hands so you can perform the signs with it." And I just find that really encouraging. Number one, in terms of just the dialogue that Moses can actually have with God. And it's funny. It's like, when you're having a conversation with someone else and they're kind of not getting what you're saying, or you're trying to just request them to do something and they just kind of reluctant to do it. But you're just trying to convince them, nah, you can do it. Just go and do it. And it's just funny. Like, you just see that. It's like God's like burning with anger. You kind of, I guess there's that thing, like I just said, like with people, like it's like, oh, come on, like just do it. But it's just funny. It's like, when you read the text, but like I'm guessing because it's saying Lord's anger, then the Lord's anger burned against Moses. So I'm guessing against it. It's probably like he's really getting annoyed right now. But I can just imagine, like, if I saw it in human terms where someone's not completely like angry, but they're just like smiling, but just annoyed, like, just come on, mate. I'm just asking you to do this. I really want to use you. But I just find that scripture really relevant to this particular podcast, and probably, as well as I just explain why I'm doing this podcast, probably the only topic I'm actually going to speak about in this episode is my actual main testimony in terms of how I actually came to follow Christ. So I'm currently 29 years old recording this episode. I've grown up in church my whole life. I've grown up into a Christian family. I come from a lineage where there's pastors, there's bishops, there's people that are overseers that have planted churches across Jamaica, the UK, probably in Canada, I assume in America as well. And I come from a family of musicians. And it's just kind of, sometimes it's easy like that. For those that can relate, that's grown up in a family that is very musical, it's easy to kind of fit into church when you're younger because you have a role. You are doing something like actively and publicly that people can see and probably accept you better. Accept you better? That's probably not even the right word. But just accept you more easily because they see that you're already serving at such a young age. But at the same time, I always had I wouldn't say acknowledgement. I've always had the understanding that God is real, even though I may have not been able to understand it, but being younger, it's just like that innate thing. It's like, of course there's God. Like, even if I didn't have the knowledge to explain to someone, it's like even just him as a creator, or maybe as I got older, even just into my early teens or whatever, you could explain simply. It's like, how can you not believe in a God with all this creation, etc. But yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean I was a follower of Christ. Like, I was still like, I was a fairly good kid, but I was a bit mischievous sometimes, and just made some stupid decisions, um, just doing certain things at school. But yeah, it's like before. I think during my early teens, I probably had a view of God as more fire and brimstone, and it's not even because of the churches I went to. I think maybe it was subconsciously, but I don't remember hearing any teaching that made me fear, like had a fear of God that way. But that's the only perspective I had of God. It's like if I did something that I know that I shouldn't have been doing, I just feel like lightning's gonna struck me down. It might have actually been from TV I was watching as well. Probably warped my understanding of who God is. But that's how I thought. I was just like, that anxiety in me is like, the next day I feel like something bad's just gonna happen, but it didn't. Not like I got away with stuff. Like, obviously I got punished and suffered the consequences for things I got caught doing. I should say. But yeah, so just growing up, and then what was it? I've gone through a lot of churches. Growing up, going through a lot of churches is probably the wrong phrase, but what I'm gonna say is, yeah, I've been part of many churches growing up. As probably you noticed, the churches that I mentioned at the beginning in the intro of this podcast, like, yeah, first church was more like my uncle was the pastor. So we left when, like, I think it was like 2000. Then went to an predominantly African church for about a year and a bit. Then moved to a more multicultural but more English kind of church, which got me more involved in church because they were very like sport related and music orientated, I should say, rather than related. Um, but yeah, and then I was there for a few years with my family. Then we moved to another church that was predominantly African, but a bit more mixed culturally. Um, and then coming up to about 18, my parents left that particular church, but I made my own decision. I was growing in a sense, um, in a relationship with God. Actually, no, what I was already. Let's go back. Let's go back because I've missed a step here. So when I was 16, 15 in when I was 15, I actually got baptized at the particular church I was at was True Vine Fellowship in Luton, and I got baptized, and in a sense, I wouldn't say I got roped into doing it, but the pastor was very persuasive, and there was no reason for me not to do it. Um, and at the end of the day, I still had that. Not I wouldn't. Well, I would say use the word conviction now, um, but at that time, I probably wouldn't be able to understand it. But I felt maybe it was just the right time. I even remember, um, even publicly saying, I think I was. What was it? I was either in detention, which is quite funny. I was either in detention or no, I was in detention because I was in the library, um, and I was in detention. I remember speaking to a guy that was in one of my classes, and he was a Muslim actually, and he asked me, "Oh, what am I doing this weekend?" I could have hid and said, "I'm not doing much," but I actually said to him, "I'm actually getting baptized," and he was actually like pretty chuffed. He's like, "Wow, that's actually great, man." So it sometimes you don't have to be afraid of just being honest. Um, don't be afraid of those conversations, because you never know what they might open up to. But yeah, so that was when I was 15. But I didn't really change my life after I got baptized. Not like I was doing anything bad, but it was more, I just didn't really change much in my life. That I didn't really have that much of a prayer life. I wasn't reading my Bible that often. I didn't really have a surrounding of Christians around my age, because even at church, like, I don't want to bait people, but people weren't that serious, or yeah, they were at church, they're just doing the church thing, and then they'll just do whatever outside. Um, but I was always my own man anyway. I would never really get involved doing like, I was never really a clubbing guy. I wasn't really like, even just dating girls. I wasn't successful. But like it's just that was just the way I was, etc. I knew I had certain boundaries in my life that I knew I didn't want to do because I knew it would probably take me down the wrong path. For some reason, that was just innate in me. Um, but getting back to the point, yeah, I wasn't really changing my life. And then when it was about a month into I started college, me and a couple of my friends, we went to play pool on a Saturday. We went like we were part of like a pool and snooker club, which is now shut down, which is annoying, in Luton. But on the way, we were walking through town, the town centre, and then there was this group of boys that parked past us. There was me and two other friends, and there was probably about a group of like maybe four or five boys, and one of them deliberately bumped into my friend. I think they were definitely looking for trouble. So get your popcorn now. This is the story where the story gets interesting. So he bumps into my friend, and then he tries to start something as if my friend deliberately bumped into him. But obviously they were just looking for trouble, and my friend he's not a fighter at all, and he was just like, no, we'll just have a little to and fro. They were, and he was just trying to provoke a situation, and then he tried to make my friend like kiss his shoe, and my friend obviously is gonna say no, and then what happened was that what did he do? I think he spat. Yes, that's what happened. He spat at my friend's face. For me, is the worst. Like punching someone, like I don't condone that at all. But for me, spitting is like the lowest form of disrespect that you can give someone. So obviously, I'm standing there. This guy just spat in my friend's face. I'm not obviously happy, but I'm not an angry, like impulsive person that will just go and just start ruffling feathers, etc. Um, and then he looks at me and he's wondering, what is there a problem? I was like, well, you just spat in my friend's face. Like, I'm obviously not gonna be happy, am I? So he's like, okay, okay. So then me and my friends try and walk on. He's like, do you want to fight? I was like, no, I don't want to fight. So then me and my friends try to walk on. The guy calls me. My friend didn't probably realize they walk around the corner. So now it's me and like these four or five guys and this one guy. The thing is, there was just only one guy that had a problem with me, and the others weren't even saying anything. And it was just this one guy, and he's just like, "Oh, where you from, etc." And he was trying to basically create this scenario where it just makes us have a fight because he just wanted to have a fight. And then, without me looking, he actually did punch me in the face. For me, it actually didn't hurt. It was more of an adrenaline, like just like what just happened. And I didn't actually retaliate because I was thinking it's pointless. Well, I probably wasn't thinking, but must have been thinking in the right way because I'm like one person against five guys. Don't be stupid, John. Like, but yeah, he punched me, and then they basically walked off. I then go follow on. My friends were like, "What's happened?" They didn't even see it, and I said, "But the guy just punched me in the face." He's like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's just walk on." So we're walking. We're three of us are walking home now, and then all of a sudden we turn around, and the boys are following us. So I said to my friend, like, "Okay, on the count of three, run." Because for me, I'm definitely not a fighter, man. I'm a lover, not a fighter. I could if I wanted to, but I just don't want to do that. That's just not my intention at all. I've never been someone that actually wants to intentionally hurt someone. So then I said one, two, three. Me and my friend Kieran run. My friend Jack, he thought they didn't have a problem with him, but he was wrong. He was so wrong. So then they actually started to try and chase after me and my friend, and then they're obviously not gonna catch me. Like I was always fastest boy at school, so I know they ain't gonna catch me. So a couple of them tried to chase after my friend. My friend Jack ended up getting into a little fight with a couple of guys, and then luckily there was someone that was driving past on the road, dragged my friend Jack into the car, and actually, thank God, drove him home. Um, but yeah, coming back to the point, because I'm probably going into too much detail. But what what actually happened after that? Obviously, I got home, told my dad, told my brother. My brother went to look like went on his car, tried to find these boys, etc. Didn't wasn't successful, etc. I was actually fine then, because I was like, oh wow, this is a situation. It's just annoying. But it wasn't actually until 2 weeks later. This is where the story actually comes into play. So my mum actually asked me to get some milk around the corner from the corner shop. So I go around the corner, get some milk. I actually recognize as I'm walking down the road near the shop the guy that actually punched me. And I was like, ah. The thing is, I had my hands in my pocket and I was gonna turn around and walk the other way, but it would have been too bait. So what I did, I actually kept on walking. I walked past him, and he was with a different group of guys. And I overheard him say, "You know what? I should beat that guy up." And then there and then, I was like, I was shook. I was shook, yeah. And then basically, I said to the shopkeeper, I was like, can I use your phone?" Because I didn't have my phone with me. I was like, I need to call my parents because this guy wants to start a fight, etc. So that the shopkeeper actually let me use his phone, yeah. And then I called my mum because my mum was home. So I said to my mum, you know, mum, that boy that punched me before, he's here around the shop and he's trying to start trouble. She's like, oh, okay. So I thought my mum was gonna basically come around the car. The thing is, this sounds like I'm a wuss, but it's because I'm not that way inclined in terms of like fighting people. Like most people at school, even at school, people probably thought I was like, oh, I'm a hard man. No one wants to mess with John, but it's just I think I was just a nice guy. People didn't want to mess with me, but for some reason they had a perception of me that for maybe if you don't really want to mess with him, but mum, I thought my mum was gonna come around and just like pick me up and take me home, etc. But my dad actually came home from work. Obviously, my mum told him. My dad weren't happy at all. My dad weren't happy at all. So obviously my dad comes up in his van. Look, he's livid. He's like, who's this guy trying to mess with my son? Long story short, nothing really happened that much between me and that guy, etc. But it wasn't from until that situation then I actually started living in fear because before the situations where it was in town, the guys, I thought I would never see him again. But it's the fact that the guy was around the same area that I live in. That's what made me more scared and more fearful because I'm like I'm not safe anymore, and I've never felt that way. I've always like you hear stories about Luton, and for me, I've never had trouble. But it wasn't until that moment that I realized actually where I'm living is not actually as safe as I thought it would be. So then I was just living in fear. Like every time I go out, I'd feel like I'm just gonna see that guy all the time. And then bearing in mind, I was at college. This was like the first time I was this is within the first month of me starting college, and I would walk to college. It would take me about 35 minutes max to walk to college. Back when I actually used to walk places before I had a car, but then yeah. So what happened? Like obviously that actually sowed. It's weird. I used that situation more as a catalyst in my life because it did actually turn my life the opposite direction. Always remember these lyrics from a rapper named YPJ. He's a pastor as well, and one of the lyrics from his raps is "Rowing in the wrong way, you chose to reverse me, gave me living water to drink when I was thirsty." And I really feel like in that moment it was like that situation, and yeah, just yeah, walking to college. It was fine. Walking on the way to college is fine. It's in the mornings in the daylight. But then obviously in England, it gets darker earlier towards the end of the year. So then this is October, November, December. A lot of that time, like I finish college at like 5 and it's dark. So then I would have to walk home. But then sometimes I would use some of that allowance money that I had for food, etc. And I would actually spend minimal on food and actually make sure I had like a money for taxi. I wouldn't do it every day, but I actually started wasting money getting a taxi home because I was that fearful that I was gonna run into this boy and he was gonna start trouble again. And there was even a situation. I think it was a couple of weeks later that um, I went to Fort Park with some friends, and it's fine. There was a group of us. There was loads of us. A few, yeah, there's a group of us, and this is how paranoid I was. I was actually living in paranoia for probably about 9 to 10 months after that situation, because literally every time I would see the back of a guy's head that looked like this guy, actually my heart started pounding. I was like, Like just start, when you're feeling that way, and that's like this ain't great. And do you know what happened? Like that moment that I thought that was him in Fort Park, I randomly just started speaking in tongues, and it's weird. It was just yeah, like to myself, and I've never had that response before. The first time I started speaking in tongues was probably the day I got baptized, and I thought that was more forced because they were just at that church. They kind of just try and encourage you to just say stuff, and they just start chatting gibberish and see if it develops into anything. But in that moment, it's probably the first time I genuinely actually started speaking tongues, and it actually was edifying me and actually helping me calm down. Um, so yeah, if anyone has any, what's the word, skepticism about tongues, like that for me, that was real. So yeah, so probably from that moment, for about 9 to 10 months, I was probably living in fear. But then during that time, it actually began my prayer life because I realized I'm not safe in this world anymore, and I realized only God could protect me. So before every day before I left the house, before I opened that front door, I started praying to God and asking for protection. Um, and even my mum sometimes would send me scriptures. I think sometimes they could see I was probably not in my within myself. Well, I was within myself. I wasn't myself, um, etc. And then my mum sent me a few scriptures that really helped me. And then yeah, I just started praying, and then those prayers of protection just started developing more into actual dialogue with God rather than just say, "Lord, protect me with your guardian angels," blah blah blah. It actually started more developing into an actual relationship with God. And then when it comes to being 18, um, I was, yeah, yeah, that's where we're going. We got back to a certain chat point now. So basically, when my parents left this particular church, I was 18. I had no reason to leave, so I decided to stay whilst they moved on. Um, and about 3 months later, this was like like I was usually playing drums at church literally every week. I was rarely off the road off a worship team, and there was one week where I wasn't actually playing, and my dad woke me up in the morning. He said, "Oh, do you want to come to church with us?" I was like, "Oh, okay, fair enough, yeah." So I actually visited their church that they were going to, and then I realized actually I want to be at this church. It was funny because it was just different. Like it wasn't just different for different sake. It was like I felt as soon as I walked in, like the pastor actually greeted me at the door. It was very early in its New Covenant Fellowship. It was probably about 8 months into them being planted in Luton, and it was just you just immediately feel the love, and that was a lot of people's testimonies when they started coming to that church, is that they just straight away they just felt the love of God in there, and from that moment on, I'm not gonna go bore you with all the details, but that's when I started to actually develop not develop a relationship, because I started developing that anyway, but I actually started to learn how to be a disciple of Jesus. So there's different phases. If you notice when I was explaining my life, like the phase of just being at church, just being active because you had a talent, and then there's not really understanding who God is, having a certain perspective of Him, and then actually living in fear and then realize actually, God, I do need you, and only seeing Him as now a protector, and then actually developing into an actual friendship that that was actually developing and molding nicely, to then actually realizing who Jesus actually is, and I actually want to learn and be a disciple of Jesus, and that's how I've been growing and continually growing. So yeah, I just wanted to share that testimony. There are probably bits that I even forgot that I'll probably explain at another point in another episode. Um, but that's gonna be the end of this particular episode. The next episode is actually gonna be my worship leader testimony kind of journey. So yeah, thanks a lot for listening, and tune in to the next episode. Peace.